Hello and welcome. I am Nancy Naji. This is Moneyline with Nancy. The African Economic Congress concluded its three-day annual Congress, that's AEC 2020, just a few days ago. In case you didn't get to watch us online or you didn't join us on African Independent Television on the 2nd to 4th of November, don't switch that dial. Don't turn off your TV. Don't even go anywhere. Just stay put because we will be bringing you excerpts of one of the sessions that we had during the three-day Congress. An interesting session it is that we're bringing you. Women session, the topic expanding women's economic potential in Africa. You would know that African women are very resilient people. Talking about agriculture, for example, African women are involved in agriculture. The session you're about to watch dissected what it should be for African women at this time. Why are we not having even so many African leaders? We'll be looking at that session in case you didn't get to join us then, so you get an opportunity to watch. We had fantastic guests. I'll not just be doing the intro right now. Just get to see for yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is my honor to moderate this important panel on expanding women economic potential, more specifically during this crisis time impacted by the COVID-19 crisis, as the world and also the African continent is trying to work out policies for socio-economic recoveries. As you may know, that women and vulnerable groups were the most impacted by the bad consequences of the COVID-19. And regardless of the efforts that has been done by many governments to mitigate the impact on women and vulnerable groups, we're still seeing that the gender gaps that are already persistent are widened during the confinement and post-confinement. So let me first ask my question to Her Excellency, Mrs. Monica Gingos, the First Lady of the Republic of Namibia. Ma'am, according to your expertise and experience in the field, of course, you hold many positions, more specifically in the economic sector, and you may know that women represents a higher percentage in the informal economy, and they have been badly impacted during this crisis. Many women lost their jobs, they lost their small jobs, they got bankrupt, they lost their sources of income. Even if it is premature now to talk about evaluation of the impact of COVID-19, more specifically on women and vulnerable groups, but from your experience in the field, what can you tell us about the level of impact on women and vulnerable groups, knowing the fact that women participation in the economy is already low even before COVID-19? Ma'am, you have the floor.
Thanks, Karima. I think what we know for sure is that pandemics follow economic and social fault lines. So I don't think it's premature to make the statement that you made that it's going to affect women more. We know it's going to affect women more, because what pandemics do is that not only follow the economic and social fault lines, they also exacerbate whatever imbalances already existed. So in effect, pandemics are mirrors in which we can see the reflection of who we are as a society. So if the economic and social inclusion of women was low before COVID, we know for sure it's worsened. If our social dynamics were struggling with patriarchy, violence, sexual and gender-based violence, HIV, antisocial behavior, tribalism, poor mental health, drug and alcohol abuse, whatever it is, that has been exacerbated. And in reflecting on the impact, all we need to do is look into our societal mirrors. And we know that financial stress caused by the economic downturns spark increased gender-based violence. We know that children are being left at home, often alone or with predatory relatives who abuse children. We know that if women aren't able to access adequate reproductive health care, it does impact their health and economic livelihoods. So as we look into this mirror that COVID has given us, we see single mothers and women in general being disproportionately affected, with no talk about the provision of childcare as a policy response. The mirror is showing us that there's inadequate shelters for gender-based violence victims and survivors. And despite the increased GB rates, we're not seeing the emergency spending being channeled into these areas. And the mirror is showing us that women working in the informal sector who depend on their daily earnings to survive, again, we're not seeing the necessary income replacement mechanisms being rolled out. So if anything, Karima, the mirror is showing us that when we commodify childcare, healthcare, or education, only the rich benefit. And COVID is an opportunity to press the reset button so that when we look in the mirror, we no longer see the ugly face of a society that consistently fails to protect its most vulnerable. So COVID is a threat and an opportunity for us to do things differently.
Yeah, what you mentioned is quite important, ma'am. Of course, we know the problems and we know the solutions. Maybe we have gender-sensitive policies, but we're always having the problem at the implementation level. Do you think that we're not prepared in our response to these vulnerable groups during crisis time, or do you think that we need to change our approaches and maybe think of outside of the box of maybe working on certain different policies, maybe different from what we've been doing before?
Absolutely, I think you're spot on. I think what COVID has shown us that whatever our structural problems are, they've become urgent. And it's not only from the perspective of gender, it's from the perspective of youth and youth unemployment and this demographic dividend that we are struggling to unlock. It's from different policy perspectives. I think what we challenged with here in this country where I live, called Namibia, is we've got a number of urgent issues that we need to resolve around gender-based violence, around HIV, around youth issues, and all of these are urgent. And we tend to focus on one crisis at a time, when the truth is we're going to need to have to multitask. We're going to need to bring multiple stakeholders on board. And I think the private sector also needs to climb on board, Karima, because we tend to leave our most complex problems to government. And the reality is, as societies, and this could be Nigeria, it could be Namibia, it could be any country, the reality in any society is that you cannot resolve your most complex problems by expecting government alone to provide solutions. We all need to provide solutions.
Yeah, I'll come back to another complementary question later. Now, I'd like to ask Her Excellency, Minister of Women Affairs from Nigeria, Hondan Pauline. You know, I've been following you. You rolled out your sleeves during this COVID-19 to assist women and vulnerable groups affected by the pandemic. And as we just talked, the gender gaps have been widened during this confinement and post-confinement, more specifically in the labor market. My question is, how have you been working with other governments and also other line ministries? Because of course, when we talk about socio-economic conditions, it needs a lot of coordination with other sectors, and more specifically in emergency time, we need more cooperation with different sectors. And my second part of the question is, of course, you've been in the field. Maybe you've documented new priorities that have emerged during crisis time. What are the priorities that you think we need to take into consideration in developing new future policies for socio-economic recoveries? You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you very much for that question. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 has posed a lot of issues, a lot of challenges that badly affect women. And women are most affected because most women businesses were badly affected because women deal with mostly the informal sector. And most of their day-to-day businesses were badly affected because of the lockdown. What women really need now is simply more of empowerment. They have been badly affected. Their children are badly affected. The issues of rape and gender-based violence have been heightened. The problem of hunger and so many issues affecting the family. The whole burden lies on the woman because she's mainly the caregiver, she's a mother, and her businesses have been crippled down. I actually took a survey of Nigerian women in the informal sector. So we had a survey with Nasima and SME.ng in Nigeria. Is an organization that deals with women in the formal sector businesses. And from the outcome of that survey, it was clearly shown that women were most affected, particularly those with in businesses in the informal sector. So we must find a way of empowering women at all levels, particularly those at the informal sector. The widows, the vulnerable are badly affected. Some have been abused. Some have been thrown out of their homes. So many issues. So we must find a deliberate way of empowering this class of women, particularly those within the informal sector, so that they can recover from their businesses that have been badly affected by the COVID-19.
Yeah, ma'am, you mentioned an important thing, which is women empowerment. Of course, before COVID-19, we've been working with certain approaches of women empowerment, and you spoke about vulnerable groups, and more specifically, women in the informal sector. Now, because of the social distancing and the many barriers that may pose an obstacle for benefit from empowerment programs, and with the digital transformation today, many women, more specifically in remote areas, do not access neither to technology nor to infrastructure. How are we going to make a balance in our empowerment programs in future for women, more specifically those who do not have access to basic services?
Thank you very much. We have a structure. At the federal level, we have the Ministry of Women Affairs. At the state level, we have the Commissioners of Women Affairs. At the local level, we have social welfare officers who deals with women at the local level where they are not exposed to technology that they can be able to benefit from most of the bank transactions. However, these structures, we have a way of reaching out to them because we have a structure right to the ward level. And at that level, we try to encourage women to form cooperative groups. If they form cooperative groups, some go into farming, some go into any kind of informal trading. So within that, they can form themselves into 10 to 15 groups in a group, and they register. And once they register, the loan can be given to them, and they can now start their business. That's how we support women at the local levels.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll get back to you later. Now I would like to ask a question to Her Excellency, Mrs. Comfort Lamley. You are representing UN Women and also ECOWAS in Nigeria, and recent UN report was speaking about the impact of the impact of the loss of the economies due to gender gaps. Here, the report says that sub-Saharan economies have lost approximately 95 billion annually due to the gender gaps in the labor market. And of course, the the numbers are alarming for 2020 because of the pandemic. How can we promote more gender-sensitive policies, more specifically at the implementation level? And if you can give us a global picture about the role that UN Women played in this pandemic, more specifically that today international cooperation is much more needed to fight this, the consequences of this pandemic. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And let me also join my hand in saying good afternoon from Abuja to all the excellencies present. Indeed, the issue of promoting more gender responsive policies is key. And I want to take off from where Her Excellency, the First Lady of Namibia, spoke, that we really have to see COVID-19 also as an opportunity. Clearly, we do have policies in place, but I think there still is quite a lot of dearth when it comes to having gender-specific policies. So I think the first point to make is that whilst we do have some policies, and whilst we also know that part of the challenge is implementing policies when we have them, and that's not just limited to gender policies. I think that's the overall policy framework. There is still a lot of work to be done in terms of improving the policy framework, and this is where the opportunity comes in. So we have to see COVID-19 as an opportunity to improve on our policy. And where we do have policies, we also oftentimes see that, as I said, there's a gap in implementation. And some of that can be due to everything from lack of political will or lack of technical capacity of some of our government partners also to implement this, as well as perhaps even not, perhaps sometimes a failure to understand the wider social and development challenges affecting targeted groups who this policy is directed at. And so from our side, in terms of women's economic empowerment, and I think the Honorable Minister of Women's Affairs also highlighted, I think that study that they did was very revealing in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on women in Nigeria. But there are three areas that as UN Women, we've felt it important also to prioritize in terms of bringing that policy and programmatic efforts to bear. Well, the first is around climate resilient agriculture, with a focus on rural women and women farmers, to be able to ensure that we can enhance their resilience to climate change. The second area is also looking at more equal opportunities for women entrepreneurs, with a large focus on what we call gender responsive procurement, trying to see how women-owned businesses can actually access public procurement contracts. I mean, from the research that we've done, less than 2% of women-owned businesses globally access these contracts. And then the third area is also looking at enhancing social and economic protection, particularly for informal sector workers and migrant workers. So these are the ways in which we are also trying to support work to address women's economic empowerment, and that is even more pertinent, I think, in this current COVID-19 recovery efforts going forward.
I have read recently a recent global report that said that in Africa constitutes more than 40% of female entrepreneurs in the continent. And as you know, that many female entrepreneurs have lost their businesses during COVID-19. Do you think that we need to think ahead of new approaches? For example, if I think about the tourism sector, if I think about the service sector, it employs a bigger percentage of women. Do you think that it is high time to think outside of the box and probably change our business models even in our economic empowerment directed to women entrepreneurs?
Absolutely, and again, this comes back to the issue of the opportunity. I mean, even before COVID, we, at least in the area of gender responsive procurement from Nigeria, some of the work that we've done, it has shown that it's not just their knowledge and information and having information about the opportunities. It's also being able to have access to finance, and sometimes it's even access to capacity building for women entrepreneurs. And so both of these are very important. And I think also looking at strengthening, again, in terms of building back better, the onus of responsibility is also
bringing the news to the people of what was happening, because as we all know, social media comes up with everything, and our own role is to make sure that we give the proper information, we give the news, and not just wanting to break the news because this has happened and that has happened. We need to verify our stories before breaking them. And I think that also helped a lot in trying to avert a lot of crisis, because we had to confirm that these are the true happening. These are the true stories of what was happening at that period. And then we had the opportunity of having, like Mrs. Comfort, she was one of those who were on air to tell us what they had to offer the women out there. A lot of people had issues. We had a lot of gender violence issues, which we reported, and also got the security agencies to follow up with some of the cases that were reported. But then not just reporting. What were we reporting, or what are we reporting? Are we just reporting that this is happening and not following up with some of the stories, which we ensured we did? And a lot of those who had serious issues were attended to, were able to link them up with, there were a lot of NGOs that had things to, that had materials to give those vulnerable people. A lot of them came to our stations. We gave them coverages. We advised them on areas we knew people who needed this assistance were. We were able to link them up. And we also followed up that some of these materials were utilized properly, were given to the right people. Now, the media, we also try to promote dignity and not just reporting that this is what happened, this person was raped or that person was raped. We need to promote these women, which you also tried to do, because it's not just reporting that this person was abused and that was abused and just showing the women. What were we doing to promote them? All this we took into consideration. But remember, we're also being controlled by a body, the National Broadcasting Commission, NBC. So there were rules we also needed to follow, and we just couldn't come out like the social media would do, break any story at any time. We needed to verify our stories and make sure the stories we were reporting were not things that would also cause crisis across the country.
Effectively, that led me to ask an important question, because we noticed that not just in Africa, but in many continents, during COVID-19, there were a lot of fake news. So, more specifically on social media, and more specifically on women and vulnerable groups, when it comes to gender-based violence or other types of issues. How did you deal with these issues from media perspective while reporting, gender-sensitive reporting about issues related to COVID-19?
As I said earlier, we needed to be sure of our source. That's the most important thing first. Who is giving you this story? Who is your source? And you go to the source to confirm, and not just wanting to be the first to break a story. You can be the last to break it, but be sure it is the right story. Those who might have broken the story first might have given false information, might have given information that might have caused crisis. So we had to make sure whatever stories we were breaking, we got to the source of it to be sure these are genuine reports. These are stories of what really happened. Even if it's coming late, it is the true story. It is the correct story. So we didn't need to rush to go out to break all these things. And then you needed to think of those who were involved. This woman you're putting on the screen, this woman you're writing about, what happens after this story has been broken? Who is protecting her? What are we doing as a station to make sure that the story we've said about this woman or about that child, we're also following up to make sure that they're protected, that no one is going after them because they're giving you eyewitnesses report. They're telling you this is what happened and I witnessed it. And those whom they might be reporting might be out there to go after them. So we also needed to make sure as you are using this source, you have it at the back of your mind that you needed to protect your source.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll get back to you again in my second part of the questions, but let me go back to the First Lady. You held several positions, including former chairperson of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council, secretary of the steering committee as an expert in the field. What is your perspective more specifically on gender-responsive fiscal policies? How can we strengthen fiscal space and budget priority to support women that are affected by COVID-19? More specifically today, we're speaking about an unknown fiscal landscape. International aid diminished. Many budget line items from governments shifted to COVID-19 response. So how can we make a balance more specifically in crisis time, as there are already persistent issues before COVID-19's non-crisis related issues that needs to be addressed? You have the floor.
I think as I reflect on your question on how do we strengthen the fiscal space and budget priority to support women, it does occur to me that the problem isn't just about the fiscal space. It's also about the political space, as well as the space that women occupy in society. So it would be difficult to find a developmental plan, a national developmental plan that excludes the recognition around the importance of women empowerment. But the challenge is that it's equally difficult to find a national developmental plan that actually allocates funding to women's empowerment in a very clear way. And there's so many studies that speak to the fact that macroeconomic benefits of greater gender inclusion, but there's so few examples of where it's done properly. And we clearly need to address this disconnect between what we say about women's empowerment from a policy perspective and what we end up actually funding. So if the evidence shows that girls and women can play a transformative role in boosting economic growth, reducing inequality and poverty, strengthening the economic resilience for families and communities, then common sense kind of dictates that we fund the greater participation of women and remove the bottlenecks that prevent women from playing a bigger role, but this isn't the case. And one of the challenges I saw on all of these high-level advisory bodies was the lack of timely and reliable data. So in relation to assessing women, there was also no gender disaggregated data. So you're trying to solve a problem that you don't fully understand. And given these budget constraints that you're talking about, you must apply your money in the best possible places. So you must prioritize, but how do you prioritize without data? So if data was available, it was either unreliable, it was maybe dated and sometimes unusable. So some suggestions on expanding the fiscal space is reforming the institutional, political and social barriers that bottleneck and deprioritize the specific needs of women. We should also do a little bit work in terms of costing the ability for women to juggle their work and family lives. That's things like looking at our maternity and parental leave, looking at affordable and accessible childcare. We did talk earlier about the burden of women having to be workers. We needed to become teachers for our kids and all the unpaid labor that we do. And also funding the protection from sexual and gender-based violence, not only in the home, also in the workplace. Another one is obviously ensuring comprehensive and timely and reliable gender disaggregated data. And then we need to scale up and sustain social safety nets for all vulnerable citizens, particularly women and children. And how we do that is really by focusing on reviewing how our political, social, economic, and institutional dynamics are structured. So the question will then be, if you want to scale up social safety nets, how do you make them fiscally sustainable? And what we need to do is the obvious, whether it's covered or not covered. We need to get rid of wasteful expenditure. We need to really bring and have a zero tolerance for corruption, because every single dollar misspent is a dollar that needs to go to social safety nets, which preserves social cohesion. We also need to stop working in silos and integrating solutions, which includes the private sector, because as I said earlier, government can't solve our most complex problems on its own. And all of that requires our mindsets to understand that it is more expensive to allow so many of our citizens to feel so left out. And in talking about fiscal sustainability, I'm reminded that we need to be more conscious that equal representation in all sectors matters, because if policies are developed in the absence of those affected by them, the policy will not be sustainable. And I really want to repeat something that was said by Comfort about this disconnect between policy and implementation, because that disconnect starts right at identifying the problem. Then there's a translation problem into the policies that we draft, and then another problem in the implementation. So we really need to narrow these disconnects if we're going to get the fiscal sustainability right.
Exactly. I think that's a very valid point, because if we talk about the fiscal landscape, and if we talk about implementation, I can give, for example, the example of the budget, the sensitive budgeting policy that many African countries have implemented, yet it is not really translated into the daily life of women. So there is a big disconnect between the policy and the implementation. And also, according to the practice, even the legislator, many members of the parliament have difficulty in reading and translating disaggregated data while discussing the annual budget. For example, now many African countries are discussing the annual budget premature discussion or urgent discussion of the budget because of the COVID-19. But if there is no capacity building of these members of the parliament to better read these data, it would be very hard to translate this into the reality.
Yes. Would you like me to comment on that?
Yes, exactly.
So Karima, my comment there, and I don't want to be rude, is that I don't know how to say this diplomatically, so I'm trying my best to figure out the right words. But the truth is this: if we've got parliamentarians who can't read budget statements, if we've got ministers who are running multi-billion ministries who don't understand balance sheets, I'd like to suggest they shouldn't be there, because our problems are too serious at this point for us to continuously have leadership who needs to drive the change that we need, who struggle with conceptualizing the basic issues that need to be addressed. So the reality is, I think if we're not careful, COVID is not just going to be a public health crisis. I think it's going to snowball into a political crisis, because I think our people are going to become impatient with our inability to get the basics right.
Thank you so
important.
Yeah, thank you so much. That leads me to ask a question to Minister Dan Pauline. Minister, how can we remove, in your opinion and from your perspective, socio-political and structural barriers that are constraining women development and empowerment in Africa? Maybe you can develop a little bit more about the empowerment program you just talked about earlier.
Thank you very much. Generally, you'll agree with me that across Africa, most of our budgets are not gender sensitive. Our budgets are not gender sensitive because somehow not enough attention or importance is attached to women issues. But the budgeting is so scattered across different ministries. So we need to reach out to the various MDAs and other sectors to see what we can get, because women issues are across boards. And training and retraining is key, particularly with the challenges of the 21st century, learning to ensure that women are computer literate, women are trained in, even at the rural areas. Even if it is into agriculture, they must be trained. We've just finished a training program for women in agriculture in our Women Development Center, and we intend to train more of that. We need to train and retrain women to get them fit into the challenges of the 21st century and to fit into the challenges affecting the economic challenges facing them. So this is key. Getting them involved through training, and we have various agencies that are organizing training programs for women. After the training, then we give them status pack in order to set up their own businesses.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Comfort, how can you and women work together with government, but also with civil society to strengthen and empower also civil society and women-led organizations to promote gender-based policies? And more specifically, if we talk now about the international cooperation, if you can give us probably the perspective of UN Women in the future, what type of programs that UN Women will be implementing to address these issues post-COVID-19?
I mean, I think this is a very critical question, of course, for UN Women, as indeed many governments around the world. We know that at this stage, many of our partners, our donor partners, are all sort of looking inward because we have recession looming or already present in many of the countries. So I think this particular moment also requires us to do further rethinking, and certainly we are doing that as UN Women too. But I think in terms of looking at the support to governments, because of course we also see that where governments plan better, it will impact the citizens and women. And so I think how to support government to plan and sequence their macroeconomic interventions is an important area that will support this going forward. We as UN Women also are looking at how to also make the case and provide the evidence on the value addition of gender-based policies, and looking at guidance that can be provided to governments in terms of tools also that can be used. I mean, over this period, we have actually invested a lot in coming up with policy briefs, guidance tools, and so on, around how to ensure that a lot of the fiscal stimulus packages that are being rolled out also are gender responsive. And so that work is important, and I think we recognize that our partners and our partners in government has always been our starting point and will be the ministries of women's affairs or gender affairs, but we also need to be working more closely with ministers of finance as well going forward, because I think as was said earlier, you know, we need to ensure that the big bucks are engendered in a way that will affect women. And I think at the global level, one of the things that UN Women has also done with UNDP in this time is also to launch a public COVID-19 global gender response tracker, which is basically monitoring policy measures that are being enacted by governments worldwide to tackle COVID-19 crisis, and then also looking at some of the responses that have integrated a gender lens. And I think it's an important tool for policymakers in terms and advocates as well on how gender responsive COVID-19 interventions can be supported. But certainly, I think that the support for women organizations and in civil society as well, from our side, that is not, we're not relenting on that, and we're continuing to support those efforts going forward.
Thank you so much. So we've been talking about capacity building, we've been talking about empowerment, and of course, we've been talking about women leadership. So the question here is, what type of leadership we're looking for in the future? And that leads me to question Mrs. Stockbissy. You are holding a senior position at AIT. Do you think that working to promote women in higher decision-making positions will influence a better implementation of gender sensitive policies?
Thank you, Marina. I agree with you, it will. I actually wanted to comment on what the First Lady said about some people not being able to understand the budget. That is part of our job as the media, to expose these people, to make sure what to be done is done. But then I believe that increasing the participation and access of women to self-expression and decision-making through the media would also help. And if we have women, we have the ministers here, I know what Comfort has done because we work with her. And I can imagine what the First Lady is doing. And of course, our minister here. And we have women in various positions who are helping to promote other women. Gone are the days when we hear them tell you a woman is another woman's problem. Not today. Women are joining hands together to work together to help the family. It's not only the men that are breadwinners nowadays. Everyone is winning the bread now to make sure that the family survives. So if we have women in top positions, they are able to help their families. They're able to even encourage the young girls who are out there. There are a lot of young girls there who need people to mentor them. A lot of women nowadays are doing that. So when we look at women who are in various high positions nowadays, they are doing a lot to encourage the young ones who are there. But still talking about the media, we also need to promote the respect and dignity of women by avoiding negative portrayal of our women. And then we must also move away from the stereotype gender portrayals. We have a lot of that happening, and a lot of women in the media today are trying to make sure that whatever goes out about a woman is something positive, and not in those days where all you hear about is a woman going into prostitution or a woman doing something you cannot talk about. Today, we hear stories of women who are in high positions and who are doing well, who are breaking records, who are making history. And those are the reports we will continue to push out for our women. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're about to wrap up our session. I would like to ask you, what are your top 3 recommendations for improving, future policies to promote more women economic potential, more specifically after COVID-19? Let me go to the First Lady first.
I think we've all basically said things are almost similar, especially when it comes to the issues around empowerment of women, making sure that we include the economic aspirations of a cross-section of women into our fiscal planning. And one of the things I just want to remind us is that we need to remember that economic empowerment alone is not going to transform or disrupt the asymmetric power relations and dynamics that are prevalent in our politics, our economy, or our society. So I really want to agree with the last speaker when she spoke to that point. So women's empowerment won't transform or disrupt problematic mindsets, harmful social or traditional norms, or institutions that constrain women. So it's not enough to accommodate women in the marketplace. It will only be enough when we transform and disrupt social and power inequities. And that's not just about economic empowerment. And that means what we need to do, Karima, is we need to have an honest evaluation of the economic, social, and political systems that are producing and reproducing the inequalities that COVID-19 has really reminded us about. We've talked to the issue of data, and we've talked to the issue of funding, the issues of women's inclusion that we keep on speaking about. So I think I just want to wrap up by quickly saying that we've got a lot of work to do, but COVID has shown us that leadership does matter. And that where there is political will, anything is possible. And I'm not suggesting it's going to be easy work, but I am saying it can and it must be done.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Mrs. Dampolin.
Thank you very much. I want to sincerely thank you for putting together this program and to get us rub minds on issues affecting women. And I want to specifically also thank my dear sister, Mrs. Dokpesi Oluwatosin, for doing a lot. Their TV programs or their outfit is always supporting women issues. And I must commend her for that. We need more women in the media that could push and promote women, which she's doing. Comfort Lamptey, we're working hand in hand with her, and the UN Women in Nigeria are doing quite a lot to support all our programs. But you'll agree with me that women issues are so huge that all hands must be on deck, and we can never get tired. We need legislation to get some of these issues through. We have the political problems, women participation in politics, because we need more women in politics, particularly elective offices, so that they can be a voice to ensure that some legislations that affect women can pass through. But with the he for she that has been enunciated by the United Nations, we are also promoting that and getting more men to speak for women, and we are getting those. There are so many of them that we acknowledge as a he for she, because women alone cannot do it. We've been talking and crying for years over. We need more men that will believe and add their voice to the issues affecting women. Yes, empowerment is there, but training, we must keep updating and training our women to be meet up the challenges of the digital economy. And finally, I want to appeal to women across the globe that the struggle continues. We can't give up. We must find more strategies to engage more women and more men that believe in our cause in order to add their voice, in order to make sure that we have some of the legislation that will help promote the cause of women, particularly in the issue of getting a special quota for women, because if we don't work and fight towards that, most of the African countries have that, where special quotas will be given to women, where women can compete among themselves. That would help, so that at the end of it, at least, it's a woman that emerges. Because we need political leadership. We need women participation in political leadership in order to make the difference in policy.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Comfort?
Yes, so I probably want to suggest two things. The first is that as we work to design gender responsive policies, we also have to make sure that these policies are accompanied by clear implementation plans and that are also funded in that respect, because oftentimes that's where we experience that breakdown between the policy and then the implementation. And also that as we look at the post-COVID responses and recovery policies and efforts, we need to recognize that building back better would require a very multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder approach, and we need to value the role of civil society also in this effort. I just want to reference one example of which I believe can be elaborated. It was during the height of the crisis when UN Women collaborated with the Ministry of Women's Affairs to actually target palliative support to the most vulnerable women. And here, it speaks to the question of social accountability, because we also used women-led organizations to also monitor how some of this assistance was actually being disseminated and how it was reaching women, and also ensure that all of these items were procured from women-owned businesses. So again, I mean, I think this was a pilot model, but the whole element of using women-owned businesses to strengthening the work of the support to women-owned businesses is going to be key, and that's where the Honorable Minister's point about quotas comes in. We have countries like Kenya that practice affirmative procurement, gender-responsive procurement, and we need to see how within the post-COVID response, these sorts of measures can also be strengthened, and also civil society organizations can also be empowered to monitor how some of these resources are being dispersed. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last recommendation from Mrs. Doc Pesci.
Thank you very much. Comfort has said it, there are a lot of policies that we must follow up are properly implemented. Several policies that are meant to support women but are not being implemented, we all need to follow up and ensure those who need to act. And then there is the issue of challenges of traditional norms, cultural norms, society norms. A lot of these are affecting our women. Women in leadership positions need to take up some of these issues with some of the traditional rulers and maybe some of the state governors. We have commissioners in some of those states for women affairs who need to look at some of these traditional and societal and cultural norms that are affecting women, that are not allowing a lot of women to come out to participate in several things they need to do that would help their families. We need to take all this up and make sure gender-based violence is also stopped. We need to put a stop to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this outstanding exchange and recommendation for this wonderful session. And I think I've noted quite important ideas, is that, of course, empowerment is important, but it's not enough. We need to work on changing policies, and we need political leadership to change the legislation and the policies, and then work together to ensure proper implementation on the ground. And it just noted that social accountability is important. So we need to empower multi-stakeholder coordination and also civil society organizations to advocate for proper implementation and also monitor government policies. I also noted that the importance of media, and regarding media as a development partner, but not as a medium to vehicle information and raise awareness, but it is an integral part in the whole process, for more specifically for changing the narrative, because it's highly important to promote women leadership in media. That is very, very important. So I would like to thank you very much.
All right, that's the much we can take. I hope you enjoyed the women's session of the African Economic Congress topic, expanding women's economic potential. Africa cannot go beyond what it is right now if we do not empower African women. African women need to be empowered. That's the much we can take. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. I am Nancy Naji. Bye now.